By the time the sun rose over Tenochtitlan on August 13, 1521, the city that had once seemed impossible to conquer was barely recognizable. Its canals were choked with broken canoes and fallen stone. Its white temples were blackened by smoke. The markets that had once astonished visitors with cacao, feathers, gold, flowers, salt, pottery, and food from every corner of an empire had fallen silent. Hunger moved through the streets. Disease had entered homes where Spanish weapons could not. And on the waters of Lake Texcoco, unfamiliar ships closed in around the last defenders. Only 2 years earlier, this had been one of the greatest cities on Earth. It had risen from a marshy island into the heart of a vast imperial world. Its rulers received tribute from distant coasts and tropical forests. Its priests watched the movements of the heavens. Its engineers held back water, carried fresh springs across the lake, and turned wetlands into gardens. Its warriors had defeated kingdom after kingdom. Then strangers arrived from beyond the eastern sea. They were few. The empire was enormous. Yet the city fell. To understand how that happened, we must go back long before the final siege, before the first Spanish sail appeared on the horizon, and even before the people later called the Aztecs built their island capital. We must return to a landscape of high mountains, cold blue lakes, smoking volcanoes, ancient ruins, wandering peoples, and forgotten cities whose shadows shaped everything that followed. In the center of what is now Mexico lies a broad highland basin surrounded by mountains. Today, much of it is covered by the vast urban spread of Mexico City. But centuries ago, the basin of Mexico was a world of water. A chain of lakes filled the valley floor. Lake Texcoco lay near the center, broad and shallow, its waters often salty. Other lakes, including Xochimilco and Chalco, held fresher water. Reeds grew along the shores. Birds gathered in great numbers. Fish, insects, amphibians, and water plants fed human communities. Canoes moved more easily than carts ever could have moved through the marshes. Above the basin rose volcanic peaks. Popocatépetl, the smoking mountain, stood to the southeast. Itzcoatl stretched nearby, its snow-covered form resembling a sleeping woman. The mountains gave the valley a sense of enclosure, as though the lakes and cities below existed inside a vast stone bowl. This was not an empty land waiting for the Aztecs. For thousands of years, human communities had farmed, traded, fought, built temples, and watched the sky here. Long before Tenochtitlan, another immense city had dominated the region. Its original name has been lost. Today it is called Teotihuacan. At its height, centuries before the rise of the Aztec Empire, Teotihuacan was one of the largest cities in the world. Great avenues crossed its urban landscape. The Pyramid of the Sun and Pyramid of the Moon rose above crowded neighborhoods. Merchants and artisans lived in compounds decorated with painted walls. Obsidian from nearby sources was shaped into blades and traded across Mesoamerica. By the time the Mexica entered the basin of Mexico, Teotihuacan had already been abandoned for many centuries. Trees and grass grew among its ruins. Yet the old city remained powerful in memory. Later peoples treated it as a sacred place. The Mexica believed it was connected to the creation of the present sun and the ordering of the cosmos. They called it Teotihuacan, often interpreted as the place where gods were made. The ruins taught a silent lesson. A city could become enormous. A city could command distant lands. And a city could disappear. After the decline of Teotihuacan, power in central Mexico shifted among new states and city kingdoms. One of the most influential was associated with the Toltecs and their capital at Tula. Later traditions remembered the Toltecs as refined builders, artists, and rulers. Their history became wrapped in legend, and later dynasties claimed links to them because Toltec ancestry gave prestige. The boundary between history and memory is not always clear. The people of central Mexico preserved the past through painted books, oral traditions, monuments, songs, and formal recitations. After the Spanish conquest, indigenous writers and informants recorded many of these traditions using alphabetic writing. But the surviving accounts were shaped by political interests, colonial pressures, translation, and the passage of time. This means the story of the Aztecs must be told carefully. Some events are well supported by archaeology and multiple written sources. Others belong partly to sacred history. The people who told them did not always separate myth from history in the way modern readers often do. A migration could be both a journey through real landscapes and a story about destiny. A ruler could be both a political figure and a link between humanity and the divine. The word Aztec itself requires explanation. The rulers of Tenochtitlan generally called themselves Mexica. They spoke Nahuatl, a language shared by many peoples of central Mexico. The word Aztec is connected to Aztlan, the legendary homeland from which the migration was said to have begun. Modern writers often use Aztec as a broad and familiar term, especially for the empire led by Tenochtitlan. But Mexica is usually more precise when speaking specifically about the people of that city and their close relatives. According to tradition, the Mexica came from somewhere to the north or northwest. Their ancestral homeland was called Aztlan, often described as a place surrounded by water. Its exact location, if it represented a single real place at all, remains uncertain. The migration story begins with departure. Groups moved southward through a landscape already occupied by established communities. They carried sacred objects and followed religious leaders. At the center of their identity stood Huitzilopochtli, the patron deity who guided them and demanded loyalty. The journey was not simple. It was remembered as long, difficult, and filled with stops, divisions, conflicts, and signs. The migrants were not entering an unorganized wilderness. They were moving into the politically crowded world of central Mexico, where older city-states controlled the best land and guarded their status carefully. The newcomers had little prestige. They were outsiders. They were sometimes described by their rivals as rough, poor, or uncivilized. Later Mexica accounts transformed these humiliations into proof of endurance. The people who were once rejected would become rulers. The marsh that no one wanted would become the center of an empire. Before that could happen, they needed a home. Tradition says that Huitzilopochtli had promised them a sign. They would know the proper place to settle when they saw an eagle perched on a cactus. In later versions, the eagle is often shown holding or fighting a serpent, an image now famous around the world. Yet early accounts do not all describe the sign in exactly the same way. The symbol developed over time, like many powerful national images. What mattered was the message. The chosen place was not a fertile open plain. It was an island or cluster of low islands in the western marshes of Lake Texcoco. Around the year 1325, according to the traditional date, the Mexica founded Tenochtitlan. At first, it did not look like the future capital of an empire. The ground was wet and unstable. Fresh water was limited. Much of the surrounding lake was salty. Powerful neighbors controlled the mainland. The settlement could not simply expand outward across dry land. Everything had to be built, carried, raised, or reclaimed. But the island offered one advantage. Added new land. Houses, temples, paths, and canals slowly appeared where water had been. The city grew not by escaping the lake, but by learning to live with it. This relationship with water would define Tenochtitlan for nearly 2 centuries. It brought beauty, food, transportation, and protection. It also brought danger. Floods could destroy buildings and contaminate fresh water. Drought could damage crops. The balance between salt water and fresh water had to be managed carefully. The founders did not yet command the basin. They survived by navigating its politics. To the west stood Azcapotzalco, capital of the Tepanec power. Under its formidable ruler Tezozomoc, Azcapotzalco dominated much of the region. Tenochtitlan became one of its tributary cities. The Mexica paid goods and provided military service. Their warriors fought in campaigns led by stronger masters. This period of subordination was crucial. The Mexica gained experience in war. They learned the geography of neighboring territories. They formed alliances through marriage. They studied the customs of established dynasties. They acquired legitimacy by connecting their rulers to respected lineages. Their first official ruler, or Tlatoani, was Ahuitzotl, who came to power in the late 14th century. The title Tlatoani means something close to speaker, but it carried the authority of a king. The ruler was not simply an administrator. He was the political, military, and sacred voice of the city. Ahuitzotl strengthened Tenochtitlan through marriage alliances and public works. His successors continued the process. Huitzilopochtli expanded trade connections. Ximalpopoca ruled while Tenochtitlan remained under Tepanec authority. Meanwhile, another Mexica city developed nearby. Tlatelolco stood on a neighboring island to the north. Its people shared close cultural and historical ties with Tenochtitlan, though the two cities sometimes competed. Tlatelolco became famous for its immense marketplace, which would later impress even the Spanish invaders. In these early generations, no one could have known how quickly the balance of power would change. Tezozomoc of Azcapotzalco had held the basin together through military strength, tribute, diplomacy, and fear. But powerful systems often become unstable when the person at their center dies. When Tezozomoc died in the 1420s, a succession crisis began. His son Maxtla took power and moved against rival cities. Tenochtitlan faced a dangerous choice. It could remain obedient and perhaps be destroyed later, or it could rebel against the power that had once protected it. The ruler of Tenochtitlan at this moment was Itzcoatl. He was not alone. Beside him stood one of the most important figures in Mexica history, a strategist and advisor named Tlacaelel. Later traditions credit Tlacaelel with shaping imperial ideology, strengthening the importance of Huitzilopochtli, and reorganizing the state. Some accounts may exaggerate his personal role, but there is little doubt that the political transformation of this generation was profound. Tenochtitlan formed an alliance with Texcoco, a major city on the eastern shore of the lake. Texcoco was led by Nezahualcóyotl, a ruler remembered as a statesman, lawgiver, builder, and poet. The alliance also included Tlacopan, a smaller Tepanec city that opposed Maxtla. Together, they challenged Azcapotzalco. The war ended in 1428 with the defeat of the old Tepanec capital. From this victory emerged the political structure often called the Aztec Triple Alliance. Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan agreed to divide tribute from future conquests. In principle, all three were partners. In practice, Tenochtitlan gradually became dominant. The city that had once paid tribute would now collect it. The people who had once fought as servants of another power would now command armies of their own. And the marsh settlement that others had overlooked was about to become the center of the most powerful empire Mesoamerica had seen in generations. The victory of 1428 did more than remove an enemy. It changed the way the Mexica understood themselves. Before the war, Tenochtitlan had been one city among many, ambitious but constrained. After the war, its rulers began to present the city as the center of a new political and sacred order. The memory of hardship remained important, but it now served a different purpose. The long migration, the rejection by older peoples, and the struggle in the marshes were no longer signs of weakness. They became the opening chapters of a destiny fulfilled. Under Itzcoatl, the Triple Alliance expanded through the basin of Mexico. Cities that had supported Azcapotzalco were defeated or forced to submit. Tribute began to flow toward the victorious capitals. Cotton cloth, food, feathers, timber, stone, cacao, rubber, precious objects, and labor moved through the imperial system. This was not an empire in the modern sense of a single territory governed everywhere by the same officials and laws. The Triple Alliance usually allowed conquered communities to keep their local rulers, temples, languages, and customs. What mattered was obedience. Tribute had to be delivered. Military support might be required. Trade routes had to remain open. Rebellion could bring severe punishment. This indirect method allowed rapid expansion. A city did not need to be completely rebuilt after conquest. Its existing elite could remain in place, provided they accepted the new balance of power. Tribute collectors and imperial representatives watched important regions. Marriage alliances connected ruling families. Garrisons were sometimes established in strategic locations. But much of daily life remained under local control. The system was efficient, but it had a weakness. Many subject peoples did not become loyal supporters of Tenochtitlan. They obeyed because they had been defeated. They paid because refusal was dangerous. Some benefited from trade or alliance, but others remembered lost independence, captured relatives, and repeated demands for tribute. That resentment would remain hidden beneath the empire's power. For now, however, the victories continued. Itzcoatl's reign marked the beginning of rapid transformation inside the capital as well. Older structures were enlarged. New temples rose. The city's sacred center became increasingly monumental. Roads and canals were improved. The expanding population required more food, more fresh water, more land, and more careful control of the lake. The Mexica had inherited generations of engineering knowledge from the peoples of the basin. They adapted it to an island capital on a remarkable scale. One of the most important solutions was the chinampa system. Chinampas are often described as floating gardens, but they did not simply drift across the lake. They were carefully constructed raised fields in shallow water. Farmers marked rectangular plots with stakes and woven branches, then filled them with layers of mud, vegetation, and organic material. Willow trees planted along the edges helped hold the soil in place. Narrow canals between fields allowed farmers to move by canoe. In the freshwater zones of Xochimilco and Chalco, chinampa agriculture could be extraordinarily productive. Moisture remained close to the roots. Lake mud restored nutrients. Farmers could grow maize, beans, squash, chilies, tomatoes, amaranth, flowers, and other crops. Some fields could produce several harvests in a year. The capital did not depend only on nearby farming. Tribute and market exchange brought food from across the highlands and beyond. Still, chinampas helped sustain the dense urban population of the lake region. Water management required even larger projects. A freshwater aqueduct carried spring water from Chapultepec to Tenochtitlan. The system was rebuilt and expanded over time, with twin channels allowing one side to be cleaned while the other remained in use. Canoes also carried drinking water into the city in large quantities. Dikes controlled the dangerous meeting of fresh and salty water. The most famous was associated with Nezahualcóyotl of Texcoco. This long barrier helped protect Tenochtitlan from flooding and reduce the flow of saline water into agricultural zones. Causeways connected the island city to the mainland. Broad roads crossed the lake toward places such as Tlacopan, Tepeyac, and Iztapalapa. Openings and bridges allowed canoes to pass. In wartime, sections of the causeways could be removed, isolating the city and trapping an approaching enemy. Canals crossed Tenochtitlan itself. People traveled by canoe through neighborhoods, carrying vegetables, pottery, firewood, stone, flowers, and every imaginable form of trade. Footpaths ran beside the water. Bridges connected districts. The city was both land and lake, built environment and living wetland. At dawn, the canals would have filled with movement. Farmers arrived from the chinampas, their canoes low in the water under baskets of produce. Fishermen returned with their catch. Merchants carried goods from distant regions. Priests climbed temple stairs. Sweepers cleaned courtyards and streets. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Drums and shell trumpets marked ritual time. Tenochtitlan was organized into neighborhoods linked to kinship, occupation, land, and community identity. These units are often called calpuli. Each could hold land, maintain a temple, organize schooling, and provide labor or warriors. The exact structure varied and changed over time, but the calpuli connected ordinary households to the larger state. Most homes were built around courtyards. Common houses used adobe, wood, reeds, and plaster. Wealthier families lived in larger compounds with multiple rooms, storage areas, gardens, and painted walls. Noble palaces could contain courtyards, administrative chambers, workshops, and accommodations for visitors. The city center was different from every other district. There stood the sacred precinct, a walled ceremonial zone filled with temples, platforms, schools, priestly buildings, shrines, and sculptures. At its heart rose the Templo Mayor, the Great Temple. The Templo Mayor was not a single structure built once and left unchanged. Successive rulers enlarged it by constructing new layers over older ones. Like the empire itself, the temple grew outward and upward through generations. At the summit stood two sanctuaries. One was dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the patron deity of the Mexica, associated with the sun and war. The other belonged to Tlaloc, the ancient god of rain, storms, fertility, and agricultural abundance. The pairing was deeply meaningful. War and rain, conquest and food, the power to take life and the power to sustain it. The city depended on both. The Templo Mayor represented sacred geography. Its architecture, sculptures, offerings, colors, and rituals connected Tenochtitlan to mountains, water, creation stories, and the movements of the cosmos. To stand before it was to stand at the center of Mexica power. Nearby stood the palace of the ruler. The royal residence was not merely a private home. It was an administrative complex where tribute was received, envoys were welcomed, legal matters were heard, nobles met, and state business was conducted. Storehouses held goods from across the empire. Artisans produced luxury objects. Messengers arrived with reports from distant provinces. The ruler's daily life was shaped by ceremony. He was surrounded by nobles, officials, servants, guards, priests, and family members. His clothing and ornaments communicated rank. His speech was formal. Access to him was controlled. Even powerful men approached with respect. Yet the ruler did not govern alone. Councils of nobles advised him. Military leaders commanded armies. Priests managed temples and the ritual calendar. Judges handled disputes and crimes. Tribute officials recorded obligations. Market authorities regulated trade. Messengers carried information over long distances. The empire depended on organization as much as conquest. Information was recorded in painted manuscripts. Scribes used images, symbols, number signs, footprints, place glyphs, and other visual systems to preserve. Tribute lists, genealogies, histories, land records, calendars, and ritual knowledge. These books are commonly called codices. Many pre-conquest codices were later destroyed, lost, or remade under colonial conditions. The surviving manuscripts reveal a sophisticated visual language rather than alphabetic writing in the European sense. Trained readers could interpret images while explaining their meaning aloud. The famous tribute records associated with the empire list demands from many provinces. A town might owe thousands of cotton garments, bundles of feathers, warrior costumes, shields, cacao, maize, beans, honey, rubber, jade, gold, or other valuable goods. Tribute depended on local resources and political arrangements. This constant movement of goods made Tenochtitlan wealthy. But wealth did not arrive only through force. Trade connected the capital to regions far beyond direct imperial control. Professional merchants known as Poctica traveled across Mesoamerica. They moved in organized groups, carried luxury goods, maintained commercial networks, and sometimes gathered political or military intelligence. A merchant expedition could last months or even years. Poctica crossed mountains, forests, hot lowlands, and hostile territories. They traded obsidian blades, textiles, copper objects, feathers, cacao, animal skins, dyes, salt, shells, jewelry, and crafted goods. Some became wealthy and influential, though they displayed their success carefully in a society where rank and ritual obligations mattered. Their journeys brought the wider world into the capital. Brilliant Quetzal feathers came from humid southern forests. Cacao arrived from warmer regions where the trees could grow. Cotton came from lower elevations. Marine shells traveled inland from distant coasts. Turquoise moved through networks reaching far to the north. Gold was worked into ornaments. Copper bells sounded in markets and ceremonies. The city's most famous commercial center was at Tlatelolco. There, on major market days, tens of thousands of people may have gathered. The exact numbers reported in later sources are difficult to verify, but there is no doubt that the market was immense. Goods were arranged by type. Food in one area, pottery in another, cloth, sandals, tools, firewood, salt, medicinal plants, feathers, jewelry, animals, prepared meals, and countless household items filled the open space. Barter was common. Cacao beans, cotton cloth, and standardized objects could serve as media of exchange. Market judges watched for fraud. Inspectors checked measures and quality. Disputes could be settled quickly. The market was not chaotic. It operated through rules understood by sellers and buyers. Imagine approaching Tlatelolco by canoe in the early morning. The first light touches the mountains. Mist rests above the lake. Ahead, thousands of voices blend into a deep, continuous sound. Paddles strike the water. Vendors arrange baskets of green chilies, red tomatoes, pale maize, beans, squash blossoms, herbs, fish, and fruit. Feather workers protect delicate bundles from moisture. Potters stack bowls in careful rows. A noble's servants negotiate for fine cloth. A traveler tastes a warm maize cake before continuing into the crowd. The market showed the empire at peace. The same roads and tribute routes that carried armies also carried food, art, stories, and ideas. People who spoke different languages met there. Local customs and distant fashions entered the capital. The city absorbed the wealth of many worlds. But beneath the color and abundance stood a rigid social order. Mexica society distinguished nobles, commoners, dependent laborers, and enslaved people. Status shaped clothing, housing, education, marriage, legal privilege, and access to office. Yet the system was not entirely fixed. A commoner who achieved distinction in war could rise in rank. Merchants could gain wealth. Families could lose status through punishment or debt. Nobles, known as Pipiltin, held high offices, controlled estates, received tribute, and formed the leadership. Class: commoners, or Masahualtin, farmed, crafted, traded, served in armies, and performed public labor. Some commoner households were prosperous. Others struggled under obligations to local and imperial authorities. Slavery in Mexican society differed from the hereditary racial slavery later created in the Atlantic world. People might become enslaved through debt, punishment, or sale, sometimes temporarily. Enslaved people could own property, marry, and in certain circumstances regain freedom. Their children were generally not automatically enslaved. Even so, slavery represented a real loss of freedom and could place people in dangerous conditions. Daily life depended heavily on family labor. Women ground maize on stone metates, prepared tortillas and tamales, wove cloth, raised children, managed households, traded in markets, served as healers and midwives, and participated in religious life. Textile production was especially important. Cotton garments functioned as clothing, tribute, wealth, and political reward. Men farmed, built, carried goods, practiced crafts, traded, served in war, and performed state labor. But these divisions were not absolute. Families adapted according to need, occupation, status, and local custom. Children entered a world shaped by responsibility. Birth itself had ritual meaning. Midwives spoke formal words to newborns and parents. A child's future was connected to the sacred calendar and the day of birth. Families offered advice through speeches emphasizing discipline, humility, respect, work, and control of desire. Education was organized and expected. Schools trained children not only in practical skills, but in the values of the state. The Telpakeli, often translated as House of Youth, educated many commoner boys in history, religion, public labor, song, discipline, and warfare. The Kalmakak trained many noble children and some talented commoners for priesthood, leadership, record-keeping, and high office. Girls also received education, much of it within households and temples, learning weaving, ritual duties, moral teachings, and the responsibilities expected of adult women. Discipline could be severe by modern standards. Children were taught to endure hunger, cold, labor, and correction. The purpose was not simply obedience within the family. The state needed adults who could farm, fight, worship, work, and accept sacrifice for the community. In a city built by generations of labor, every child was raised beneath the weight of expectation. To understand the Aztec world, it is necessary to enter a way of thinking in which time, nature, politics, and religion were inseparable. The Mexica did not imagine the universe as a machine running by itself. The cosmos was alive with forces that could create, nourish, destroy, and transform. Mountains held water. Caves opened toward the underworld. Wind carried divine presence. Maize was not merely food. It was part of the sacred relationship between people and the world that sustained them. The gods were many, and their identities could overlap. Huitzilopochtli guided the Mexica and embodied the victorious movement of the sun. Tlaloc governed rain, storms, and agricultural fertility. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, had ancient associations with wind, priesthood, knowledge, creation, and rulership. Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, was connected to night, destiny, conflict, power, and unpredictable change. Coatlicue represented the terrifying and fertile power of the earth. Xipe was linked to renewal, vegetation, and the shedding of old skin. Zacapili belonged to flowers, song, beauty, pleasure, and art. Mictlantecutli and Mictecacituatl ruled the realm of the dead. These names do not form a simple list with fixed duties. Deities could appear in multiple forms. A god might be benevolent in one ritual and dangerous in another. Different communities emphasized different divine beings. Religious ideas had developed over centuries and were shared, adapted, and reinterpreted across Mesoamerica. The Mexica believed they lived in the era of the fifth sun. Earlier worlds had existed and ended in catastrophe. The present age was not guaranteed to last forever. It had been set in motion through divine sacrifice at Teotihuacan, where the gods offered themselves so the sun might move across the sky. This idea carried a profound obligation. Life continued because sacrifice had already occurred. Human beings owed a debt to the gods. Offerings took many forms. People burned incense, offered food, flowers, paper, rubber, precious objects, animals, and their own blood. Priests and devotees practiced bloodletting by piercing ears, tongues, or other parts of the body. Fasting, sleeplessness, cold baths, celibacy, and pilgrimage could all become acts of devotion. Human sacrifice was also part of Mexica's state religion, and it has become the most famous and most misunderstood aspect of Aztec history. The practice was real. Archaeology, indigenous accounts, Spanish descriptions, and ritual remains all confirm it. Captives taken in war were among those sacrificed, though not every victim had the same status or ritual role. Some represented deities during long ceremonial preparations. Children were offered in rites connected to rain. Other victims were killed in festivals tied to warfare, renewal, or agricultural cycles. The scale remains debated. Spanish conquerors and later writers sometimes reported enormous numbers, and such figures could serve political and religious agendas by portraying conquest as a righteous destruction of evil. At the same time, minimizing the practice would also distort the past. The safest conclusion is that human sacrifice was significant, public, and politically important, but that specific totals should be treated cautiously. For the Mexica, sacrifice was not understood simply as punishment or cruelty. It was part of a sacred economy of debt, nourishment, and cosmic survival. Victims could be treated as embodiments of gods. Warriors sought captives because capturing an enemy alive brought greater honor than simply killing one in battle. The state used ceremony to connect military victory with divine approval. Yet understanding a belief does not require romanticizing the suffering it caused. For the person chosen, the experience could involve fear, coercion, pain, and death. For communities forced to provide captives or tribute, imperial religion could feel like domination. The same ritual that promised cosmic balance to one group could represent terror to another. This tension ran through the empire. Beauty and violence were not separate worlds. Flowers decorated temples where blood was offered. Poetry praised friendship and the fragility of life, while armies marched to capture prisoners. Skilled artists carved stone images of gods whose power could both nourish and destroy. The sacred precinct was a place of music, color, incense, discipline, ceremony, and death. The ritual calendar organized this world. Mesoamerican peoples used more than one calendar at the same time. A 260-day sacred count combined numbers and day signs to guide divination and ritual. A 365-day solar calendar followed agricultural and ceremonial cycles. When the two counts aligned, they formed a cycle of 52 years. The completion of this cycle carried special importance. At the end of 52 years, people feared the possibility that the sun might fail to rise and the world could end. During the ceremony later called the New Fire Ritual, household fires were extinguished. In darkness, priests watched the heavens. A new flame was kindled through sacrifice and carried outward to relight the city. The ceremony renewed more than fire. It renewed time itself. Old household objects might be discarded. Temples could be renovated. Families waited through the night. When the new flame appeared, relief spread across the basin. The world had been permitted to continue. The Mexica calendar was not a primitive approximation of time. It was a complex system connecting astronomy, agriculture, memory, ritual, and political authority. Priests observed celestial patterns. They tracked seasons, festivals, market cycles, and auspicious days. The sky was full of meaning. The rising and setting of the sun marked sacred directions. Venus could be linked to danger and war. Eclipses were unsettling. Comets, unusual fires, floods, and strange animal behavior might be interpreted as signs. Later accounts describe a series of omens before the Spanish conquest: a strange light in the sky, a burning temple, boiling lake water, a weeping woman, and mysterious figures. These stories are famous, but historians debate when and how they were shaped. Some may preserve genuine memories of unusual events. Others may have been organized after the conquest to make disaster appear foretold. People often rewrite the past once they know the ending. Events that once seemed ordinary become warnings. A ruler's hesitation becomes fate. A storm becomes prophecy. In the years after Tenochtitlan fell, survivors tried to understand how a world that had appeared so powerful could collapse so quickly. Long before that collapse, however, imperial confidence seemed justified. Itzcoatl died in 1440. He was succeeded by Moctezuma Ilwikemana, often called Moctezuma I to distinguish him from the later ruler who met Hernán Cortés. Moctezuma I expanded the empire far beyond the basin of Mexico. Campaigns pushed east toward the Gulf Coast, south into regions of present-day Guerrero and Oaxaca, and across important trade routes. Tribute wealth increased. The court grew more elaborate. Noble status became more sharply defined. His reign also faced environmental disaster. In the early 1450s, severe drought and crop failure brought famine to central Mexico. Sources describe hunger, migration, and the sale of children or family members into servitude in exchange for food. The exact sequence of climatic events is still studied, but the suffering was remembered for generations. The famine exposed the limits of imperial power. Armies could conquer cities, but they could not command the rain. Rulers responded with relief efforts, food distribution, and expansion into regions that could provide more reliable tribute. The crisis may have encouraged the empire to secure agricultural lands beyond the basin. It also strengthened the sacred importance of rituals connected to rain and fertility. During this period, warfare became increasingly formalized as a path to status. Every young man trained for military service, though not all became professional warriors. The army included commoners, nobles, veteran societies, and allied contingents from subject cities. Military dress communicated achievement. Warriors who captured enemies could earn the right to wear special clothing, ornaments, hairstyles, and insignia. The famous eagle and jaguar warriors have become symbols of Aztec military culture. These terms refer to elite associations connected to courage, capture, and noble service, though the full organization of the army was more varied than popular images often suggest. Weapons were designed for the fighting styles of Mesoamerica. The Ahuitzotl was a wooden weapon edged with extremely sharp obsidian blades. It could cut deeply, though its construction differed from a European metal sword. Spears and spear throwers extended reach. Bows, slings, clubs, and thrusting weapons were also used. Quilted cotton armor protected the body and could resist many projectiles. Shields were decorated with feathers, hide, and painted designs. Battle often began with missiles. Arrows, stones, and darts flew across the field before warriors closed for hand-to-hand combat. Capturing an opponent alive was especially valuable, but battles were not bloodless contests. Men were injured, killed, crushed, drowned, or carried away. Armies moved without horses, wheeled transport, or large draft animals. Supplies traveled on the backs of human porters. Roads and tribute stations supported campaigns. Canoes became essential in the lake region. Commanders used banners, drums, horns, and messengers to coordinate movement. Bright feathered standards identified leaders, and units threw dust and confusion. The empire's rapid expansion required a steady cycle. A target city might first receive demands. Envoys presented terms and expected respect. Refusal could lead to war. After defeat, tribute was assessed. Local rulers swore obedience. Hostages or marriage alliances might secure loyalty. If rebellion followed, punishment could be severe enough to warn neighboring cities. Some wars were connected to what later sources call the Flower Wars. These conflicts, especially involving Tlaxcala and neighboring states, have often been described as ritual battles fought mainly to capture victims for sacrifice. The reality was probably more complex. They served military training, political pressure, elite competition, territorial strategy, and captive-taking. They were real wars with real consequences. Tlaxcala remained independent east of the basin of Mexico. Its survival became one of the most important facts in the later conquest. The Mexica surrounded Tlaxcalan territories and fought them repeatedly, but never fully absorbed them. Whether Tenochtitlan intentionally preserved Tlaxcala as a source of captives, as some later accounts suggest, or simply failed to conquer a determined rival remains debated. What is certain is that Tlaxcalan hostility toward the Mexica was deep. To the west, the Puripeca state, often called the Tarascan Empire in older sources, presented another barrier. Based around Lake Pátzcuaro in western Mexico, it controlled rich metalworking regions and developed a powerful military system. The Mexica attempted to expand westward under the ruler Ahuitzotl in the late 15th century. The campaign ended in a major defeat. Thousands of Mexica and allied warriors were killed or captured. The frontier between the two empires remained tense and militarized. This defeat mattered. The Aztec Empire was powerful, but it was not unstoppable. It faced states capable of resisting it. Its rulers had to manage borders, rebellious provinces, and competing alliances. Ahuitzotl is also remembered for bringing Tlatelolco under the direct control of Tenochtitlan after conflict between the two neighboring cities. In 1473, Tlatelolco was defeated and its ruler was killed. The great market remained, but Tenochtitlan now dominated its sister city. The conquest united the island more tightly under one political center. Ahuitzotl was followed by Tizoc, whose reign was short and whose military reputation was weaker. Later accounts claim that he may have been poisoned, though certainty is impossible. His successor, Ahuitzotl, restored aggressive expansion. Ahuitzotl became one of the most successful military rulers in Mexica history. Campaigns pushed imperial power farther toward the Pacific coast, the Gulf lowlands, and southern trade zones. Captives and tribute flowed into Tenochtitlan. The Great Temple was enlarged and rededicated in a major ceremony. His reign also brought a disaster created by engineering ambition. A new aqueduct was built to increase the capital's water supply. According to tradition, the flow became too powerful and contributed to a devastating flood. Houses collapsed. Streets disappeared beneath water. Ahuitzotl himself may have been injured during the crisis, though the details of his death remain uncertain. The story contains a familiar pattern. The same systems that made Tenochtitlan extraordinary could also threaten it. Water fed the city, defended the city, transported the city, and nearly drowned the city. By the time Ahuitzotl died around 1502, the empire had reached its greatest territorial extent. Its armies had marched from the high valleys into tropical forests and coastal plains. Its merchants carried wealth across enormous distances. Its capital had become a city of perhaps 200,000 people, though all population estimates are approximate. The next ruler inherited immense power. His name was Moctezuma Xocoyotzin, commonly known as Moctezuma II. He would govern the empire at its height, and he would be remembered forever for the strangers who arrived during his reign. Moctezuma II came to the throne through selection by leading nobles, not through automatic inheritance alone. He belonged to the royal family and had served in military and religious roles. The chosen ruler had to be experienced, respected, and capable of commanding both armies and ceremony. His coronation required conquest. A new Teletoni demonstrated legitimacy by leading or authorizing a successful campaign and bringing captives back for ritual. Moctezuma's early wars reinforced imperial authority and announced that the transition of power had not weakened Tenochtitlan. Later Spanish accounts often describe him as distant, proud, and surrounded by strict court ritual. Some of these descriptions reflect genuine imperial formality. Others may have been shaped to explain his later decisions. He was not a passive ruler waiting for conquest. Before 1519, he led a powerful state, reorganized the court, appointed officials, oversaw wars, and dealt with rebellions and frontiers. Under Moctezuma, distinctions between nobles and commoners became more pronounced. Certain offices and privileges were reserved more tightly for hereditary elites. Palace ceremony grew more elaborate. Visitors approached the ruler with lowered eyes. Nobles wore specific garments according to rank. Servants swept the ground and prepared rooms before him. The ruler's palace contained gardens, aviaries, workshops, armories, council rooms, and storehouses. Birds from distant climates were kept and cared for. Skilled artisans worked feathers, gold, wood, stone, and shell. Tribute goods were sorted and redistributed. Messengers waited for orders. Meals at court displayed imperial reach. Foods arrived from different ecological zones: maize, beans, squash, chilies, tomatoes, fish, game, fruits, cacao, and countless prepared dishes. Formal service emphasized hierarchy. Yet descriptions of endless luxury should be read with awareness that conquerors were eager to portray the palace as both marvelous and excessively wealthy. Moctezuma's authority extended through a network rather than a continuous block of directly ruled land. Some provinces were loyal. Others were recently conquered. Some border states remained independent. Certain regions paid tribute grudgingly while waiting for a chance to resist. The empire's maps would not have resembled modern national borders. Power followed roads, cities, tributary relationships, and military corridors. A town loyal to Tenochtitlan might sit near another that resisted. Mountain ranges and forests complicated communication. Local rulers pursued their own interests. Imperial unity was strongest when fear of Mexica retaliation remained strong. Moctezuma worked to keep that fear alive. He campaigned especially in Oaxaca and other southern regions. Some cities were punished for revolt. Others were drawn more closely into the tribute system. Yet the empire did not conquer every opponent it faced. Tlaxcala remained independent. The Purapeca frontier remained closed. Farther southeast, Maya kingdoms followed their own political worlds. The Aztec Empire was therefore vast but unfinished. Like most empires, it contained both confidence and anxiety. Every victory created new obligations. Every new province needed supervision. Every demand for tribute risked resentment. Every defeated ruler might become a future rebel. Still, nothing in the early years of Moctezuma's reign suggested that a small expedition from another continent would soon break the system apart. To the east, beyond the Gulf of Mexico, events were unfolding that the Mexica could not see. European sailors had crossed the Atlantic since Christopher Columbus's first voyage in 1492. Spanish settlements spread through Caribbean islands. Conquest, forced labor, violence, and epidemic disease devastated indigenous communities. From these colonies, expeditions probed the mainland coast. In 1517, an expedition led by Francisco Hernández de Córdoba reached the Yucatan Peninsula. The Spaniards encountered large towns, stone buildings, and organized resistance. They suffered heavy losses but returned with reports of wealthy lands. In 1518, Juan de Grijalva led another voyage along the Gulf Coast. His men traded with local communities and learned more about the powerful inland empire associated with Moctezuma. Gold objects increased Spanish interest. News traveled in both directions. Coastal communities sent reports inland. Moctezuma's officials heard of floating structures, pale-skinned strangers, metal weapons, and unfamiliar animals. These descriptions were filtered through distance, fear, translation, and rumor. The ruler sent observers and gifts. In February 1519, a larger expedition left Cuba under Hernán Cortés. Cortés had not been sent to conquer an empire. His legal authority was uncertain, and his relationship with the governor of Cuba, Diego Velázquez, had deteriorated before departure. But Cortés was ambitious. Once on the mainland, he created a town council at Veracruz whose officials claimed the power to appoint him captain. Through this political maneuver, he attempted to place himself directly under the Spanish crown rather than under Velázquez. His force was small compared with the armies of Tenochtitlan. Numbers vary by source and moment, but he began with only several hundred Spaniards, along with horses, cannon, crossbows, firearms, steel weapons, sailors, servants, and enslaved people. These technologies mattered, but they did not make victory inevitable. A horse could terrify people who had never seen one, but horses could be wounded or killed. Early firearms were slow and unreliable. Cannon were difficult to move. Steel blades were deadly, yet the Spaniards were vulnerable when surrounded. The decisive advantage would not be a weapon. It would be alliance. Cortés first stopped near the island of Cozumel, where he found Geronimo de Aguilar, a Spaniard who had survived a shipwreck years earlier and learned a Maya language. Aguilar became an interpreter. Farther west, after fighting Maya-speaking forces in Tabasco, Cortés received gifts that included enslaved women. Among them was a young woman remembered by several names, Malintzin in Nahuatl, Dona Marina after baptism, and Malinche in later tradition. She spoke a Maya language and Nahuatl. At first, Cortés could speak Spanish to Aguilar, who translated into Maya, and Malintzin could translate from Maya into Nahuatl. She soon learned Spanish and became the central interpreter, diplomat, advisor, and intermediary of the expedition. Her role was essential. Without communication, the Spaniards could not have negotiated alliances, understood rivalries, issued demands, gathered intelligence, or survived the political world they had entered. Malintzin's legacy later became deeply contested. Some portrayed her as a traitor, as though a unified Mexican nation had existed and she had freely chosen to betray it. That judgment ignores her circumstances. She was an indigenous woman who had been enslaved, transferred between powerful men, and forced into a dangerous conflict. She did not belong to the Mexica ruling class. The future nation of Mexico did not yet exist. She was also not merely a silent victim. Sources show her speaking with rulers, organizing negotiations, interpreting threats, and moving between cultures with extraordinary skill. Her choices were constrained, but her influence was real. At Veracruz, emissaries of Moctezuma met the Spaniards. They brought gifts of fine cloth, feathers, gold, and ceremonial objects. Moctezuma may have hoped to honor the newcomers, gather information, and persuade them not to continue inland. Diplomatic gift-giving was a normal tool of politics. Cortés interpreted the wealth differently. The gold confirmed that even greater riches existed inland. Every gift intended to satisfy him increased his desire to advance. Later stories claim that Moctezuma believed Cortés was the returning god Quetzalcoatl. This idea has become one of the most repeated explanations of the conquest. Yet most modern historians treat it with great skepticism. The claim appears strongly in later colonial narratives and may reflect misunderstanding, translation, or Spanish efforts to present conquest as destiny. Moctezuma may have been uncertain about who the strangers were, but uncertainty is not the same as believing they were gods. He had practical reasons to proceed carefully. The Spaniards were few, but they were unpredictable. Killing foreign envoys could provoke unknown powers across the sea. Allowing them inland created risk, but also made them easier to observe. Moctezuma ruled through diplomacy as well as war. He may have hoped to control the encounter through gifts, warnings, and delay. Cortés refused to turn back. He moved toward the interior and soon entered the lands of the Totonac city of Sempoala. The Totonacs paid tribute to the Aztec Empire and resented its demands. Their rulers complained about Mexica collectors and the taking of goods and people. Cortés recognized an opening. He encouraged the Totonacs to resist tribute officials, then presented himself as their protector. This was dangerous manipulation. The Spaniards were not liberators acting from respect for indigenous independence. Cortés intended to gain power for himself and the Spanish crown. But subject peoples did not know the full future. They saw a chance to weaken Tenochtitlan. Totonac allies provided food, carriers, soldiers, and regional knowledge. The expedition was no longer simply Spanish. From this moment onward, every description of a few hundred Europeans confronting millions becomes misleading. Indigenous allies would make up the majority of the forces that marched with Cortés, fought in battles, built siege equipment, carried supplies, and died in the war. Before advancing, Cortés dealt with the possibility that some of his men might desert and return to Cuba. The famous story says he burned his ships. In reality, he likely had most of them disabled or dismantled. Whatever the exact method, the message was clear. Retreat by sea would not be easy. The expedition began climbing away from the hot Gulf Coast. The landscape changed rapidly. Tropical lowlands gave way to forests, steep slopes, and cold highlands. Men and used to altitude struggled. Horses climbed narrow roads. Porters carried cannon and supplies. The white summit of Citlaltépetl, now called Pico de Orizaba, rose in the distance. Ahead lay Tlaxcala. The independent confederation had resisted Mexica pressure for generations. But the Tlaxcalans did not immediately welcome Cortés. They saw an armed foreign force moving through their territory with Totonac allies and prepared to fight. Several fierce battles followed. Tlaxcalan forces nearly overwhelmed the invaders. Spanish horses, steel, firearms, and tactics caused confusion and casualties, but the outcome was far from certain. Cortez's men were exhausted and wounded. Had Tlaxcalan leaders maintained a unified strategy of total destruction, the expedition might have ended there. Instead, diplomacy changed the conflict. Different Tlaxcalan factions debated what to do. Some leaders saw the strangers as a potential weapon against Tenochtitlan. Peace was made. The Spaniards entered Tlaxcala and received food, rest, and new allies. This alliance transformed the invasion. Tlaxcala had manpower, local intelligence, supply networks, and decades of experience fighting the Mexica. Its leaders hoped to break the power that had surrounded and attacked them. Cortés promised friendship and advantage. Neither side fully controlled what the alliance would create. From Tlaxcala, the combined force moved toward Cholula, a major sacred and commercial city with strong connections to the cult of Quetzalcoatl. What happened there remains disputed. Cortés and his allies claimed they discovered a plot to ambush the Spaniards. Acting on warnings, perhaps including information delivered through Melanson, they gathered Colulan nobles and people in a central space. Then Spanish and allied forces attacked. The massacre killed a large but uncertain number of people. Buildings were burned. Civilians died. Alongside warriors, the violence sent a deliberate message to the region. Resistance could bring catastrophe. Spanish accounts justified the attack as preemptive defense. Other traditions describe it as betrayal and terror. The truth is difficult to reconstruct in detail, but the result is clear. Cortés had demonstrated that he was willing to use mass violence for political effect. After Cholula, the road climbed toward the mountains between Popocatépetl and Itzcoatl. From the high pass, the travelers could see the basin of Mexico below. Lakes reflected the sky. Towns dotted the shores. Causeways crossed the water. And on its island, connected to the mainland by straight roads, stood Tenochtitlan. For the Spaniards, the sight was astonishing. For the Mexica, the strangers were no longer distant reports. They were coming down from the mountains. On November 8, 1519, Hernán Cortés and his followers approached Tenochtitlan along the causeway from Iztapalapa. The entrance into the capital was carefully staged. Moctezuma came out to meet the visitors, accompanied by nobles in rich clothing. The ruler traveled beneath a canopy. The road had been swept. Crowds watched from rooftops, canoes, bridges, and the edges of the causeway. Cortés and Moctezuma exchanged formal greetings through interpreters. Later writers placed elaborate speeches in their mouths, but the exact words cannot be recovered with confidence. Translation passed through several languages and cultural expectations. Polite phrases could carry different meanings. A statement of humility by a ruler might be ceremonial rather than literal. A Spanish listener eager for submission could mistake courtesy for surrender. The meeting was not the peaceful transfer of an empire. Moctezuma did not simply hand his kingdom to Spain. He welcomed dangerous guests because he was trying to manage a crisis. The Spaniards were housed in the palace complex once associated with Moctezuma's father, Ahuitzotl. They were given food and gifts. They saw courtyards, temples, canals, gardens, and markets. From the top of the Great Temple, Cortés looked across a city larger than any he had known in Spain. The visitors admired its order and beauty. They also judged it through the eyes of Christian conquerors. The temple's images, incense, blood offerings, and sacrificial practices appeared to them as signs of idolatry. Cortés repeatedly demanded religious change, though his position was still fragile. He wanted gold, political submission, and conversion. These goals could reinforce one another in his mind. Tenochtitlan itself continued to function around the foreign guests. Canoes moved through canals. Markets opened. Priests performed ceremonies. Tribute arrived. Messengers crossed the lake. Yet the balance was shifting. The Spaniards were surrounded by a population that could destroy them if ordered to do so. They had entered by narrow causeways with bridges that could be removed. Their horses needed space and food. Their gunpowder was limited. Every palace wall could become a trap. Cortés decided that security required control of Moctezuma. Using a conflict on the Gulf Coast as justification, the Spaniards seized the ruler inside his own capital. The details vary among accounts, but Moctezuma became a captive while outwardly continuing to rule. This was one of the boldest and most dangerous moves of the conquest. The Spaniards forced the empire's central figure to issue commands under their supervision. Officials brought tribute in gold. Nobles entered the palace to meet a ruler watched by armed foreigners. The normal structure of authority remained visible, but its center had been occupied. Why did the Mexica tolerate this? There was no single reason. Moctezuma's sacred and political status made immediate action difficult. Nobles may have disagreed about how to respond. The Spaniards held hostages and possessed unfamiliar weapons. Fighting inside the crowded capital could cause enormous damage. Some leaders may have believed time would reveal a safer solution. Moctezuma's captivity did not mean everyone accepted Spanish authority. Tension increased as Cortés demanded more gold and interfered with religious life. The Spaniards searched palaces and storehouses. Gold objects were melted down for division, destroying works of art whose cultural value could not be measured by metal weight. The invaders also placed Christian images in sacred spaces and pressured Moctezuma to permit worship. For the Mexica, this was not a minor disagreement. Temples were central to the relationship between city, ruler, gods, rain, harvest, war, and time. To attack the temples was to threaten the order of the world. Months passed in this unstable occupation. Then news arrived from the coast. The governor of Cuba had sent a force under Panfilo de Narvaez to arrest Cortés and take command of the expedition. Narvaez arrived with more Spanish soldiers than Cortés currently had in Tenochtitlan. Cortés faced danger from his own countrymen. He left the capital with part of his force, marched toward the coast, surprised Narvaez at night, and defeated him. Many of Narvaez's soldiers then joined Cortés after hearing of the wealth of Tenochtitlan. The victory gave Cortés more men and weapons. But while he was away, disaster erupted in the capital. He had left Pedro de Alvarado in command. During the festival of Texcoco, Mexican nobles and warriors gathered in the sacred precinct for ceremony. They wore fine ornaments and performed ritual dances. Alvarado ordered an attack. Spanish soldiers closed the exits and killed participants. The reasons remain contested. The Spaniards later claimed they feared an uprising or wished to stop sacrifice. Indigenous accounts describe an unprovoked massacre driven by fear and greed for gold ornaments. Whatever Alvarado believed, the result was catastrophic. The sacred precinct became a killing ground. Unarmed or lightly armed celebrants were cut down. Nobles, priests, musicians, and warriors died. The attack shattered the fragile restraint that had held the city together. Tenochtitlan rose in rebellion. Mexica fighters surrounded the Spanish quarters. They attacked with arrows, stones, darts, and fire. Bridges were removed. Food and water were cut off. The invaders were trapped inside the city they had tried to control. Cortés returned from the coast with his enlarged force, but the situation could not be restored. He entered the palace compound under attack. Moctezuma's authority had collapsed. The captive ruler was brought before the people, perhaps to order them to stop fighting. What happened next is uncertain. Spanish accounts say the crowd threw stones and projectiles that wounded him, leading to his death. Indigenous traditions accused the Spaniards of killing him when he was no longer useful. There is no final proof. Moctezuma died in late June 1520. The ruler who had received Cortés with ceremony was gone. To later generations, his name became tied to hesitation and defeat. Yet this judgment can be too simple. He confronted a threat unlike any previous ruler had faced. He tried diplomacy, surveillance, controlled hospitality, and political management. His decisions failed, but failure does not mean he lacked intelligence or courage. The deeper problem was that each choice narrowed the next. Allowing the Spaniards into the basin created danger. Allowing them into the city increased it. Once captured, Moctezuma's ability to command loyalty weakened. Once the Texcoco massacre occurred, compromise became nearly impossible. By the end of June, the Spaniards knew they had to escape. Their supplies were low. The Mexica controlled the bridges. The causeways were exposed. The invaders carried wounded men, horses, cannon, and a heavy load of treasure. Cortés planned a nighttime withdrawal toward Tlacopan. On the night of June 30th into July 1st, 1520, the column moved out under rain and darkness. At first, silence protected them. Then the alarm spread. Canoes filled the canals. Mexico warriors attacked from both sides of the causeway. Drums sounded through the night. Arrows and stones fell into the crowded column. At gaps in the road, portable bridges failed or became trapped. Panic followed. Men, Horses, weapons, treasure, and bodies fell into the water. Some Spaniards who had loaded themselves with gold were dragged down. Others drowned in canals filled with wreckage. Indigenous allies suffered terrible losses. The retreat became known to the Spanish as La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. The name centers Spanish grief, but the event was a major Mexican victory. The invaders had been driven from Tenochtitlan. For a moment, the empire had survived. Cortés and the remnants of his force fled west and north, pursued through the valley. At Otumba, they fought a major battle against Mexican forces. Spanish cavalry attacks and the killing of a prominent commander helped break the opposing formation, allowing the survivors to continue toward Tlaxcala. They arrived wounded, exhausted, and reduced in number. The Tlaxcalans now faced another decisive choice. They could destroy their weakened allies or continue the war against Tenochtitlan. Some leaders argued that the moment had come to end the alliance. Others believed the Spaniards still offered the best chance to defeat their ancient enemy. The alliance held. This decision may have mattered more than any single Spanish weapon. In Tenochtitlan, leadership passed to Cuitlahuac, Moctezuma's brother. He had opposed the Spanish presence and helped organize resistance. His city had achieved a dramatic victory, but the danger was not over. The Mexica prepared for another invasion. They repaired defenses, watched the causeways, and attempted to rebuild imperial authority. Messages went to subject cities demanding support. Yet the political situation had changed. Some tributary communities began to reconsider their loyalties. The myth of Mexican invincibility had been damaged. Then an enemy arrived that no army could see. Smallpox entered central Mexico. The disease had traveled across the Atlantic with Europeans and their movements. Indigenous populations in the Americas had no previous history of exposure to smallpox and therefore lacked the accumulated immunity found in many Old World communities. The epidemic spread through crowded towns and households. People developed fever, pain, weakness, and fluid-filled lesions. The sick could not gather food, carry water, care for children, or bury the dead. Those who survived might be scarred or blinded. Families and neighborhoods were struck together. Smallpox did not choose between warrior and priest, noble and commoner, supporter of Tenochtitlan and enemy of Tenochtitlan. It attacked the entire social system. Cuitlahuac died after ruling for only a few months. The epidemic killed leaders, soldiers, farmers, artisans, porters, healers, and countless others. It weakened the capital at the exact moment when reconstruction and defense were most urgent. Disease alone did not conquer the Aztecs. The Mexica continued to resist fiercely, but smallpox changed the balance. It reduced manpower, disrupted command, damaged morale, and spread suffering through communities already facing war. A new ruler was chosen. His name was Cuauhtémoc. He was young, probably in his 20s, and connected to both Tenochtitlan and Tlatelolco. He inherited no peaceful throne. He inherited a city surrounded by enemies. In Tlaxcala, Cortés rebuilt his coalition. Reinforcements, weapons, and horses arrived from the coast. More indigenous communities joined, some because they hated the Mexica, some because they feared the new alliance, and some because local politics made neutrality impossible. Cortés understood that another direct march into Tenochtitlan would fail unless he controlled the lake. So he planned to build ships. 13 brigantines were constructed in sections in Tlaxcalan territory. Timber was cut. Iron fittings, sails, rope, and other materials were prepared. Thousands of indigenous laborers carried the pieces across mountains toward Lake Texcoco. Canals were widened and launch routes prepared. The siege of Tenochtitlan would be fought on land and water. The island city that had once been protected by the lake would now be trapped within it. The final campaign began in the spring of 1521. Cortés did not advance with Spaniards alone. Tens of thousands of indigenous allies gathered from Tlaxcala, Texcoco, Huejotzingo, Chalco, and other communities. Their exact numbers changed throughout the campaign and are impossible to establish with certainty, but they vastly outnumbered the European soldiers. Many had their own reasons for fighting. Some sought revenge against Tenochtitlan. Some wanted freedom from tribute. Some wished to settle old disputes with neighboring towns. Some joined because the growing coalition made resistance dangerous. Some hoped the new order would reward them with land, titles, trade, or protection. The war that destroyed the Aztec capital was therefore also a Mesoamerican civil war, reshaped and exploited by a foreign invasion. The coalition first secured towns around the lake. Texcoco became Cortés's main base on the eastern shore. It had once been one of the three capitals of the Triple Alliance. Internal conflict over succession helped the Spaniards gain allies there. From Texcoco, the invaders could launch ships, gather supplies, and threaten Tenochtitlan from multiple directions. The brigantines entered the lake in April 1521. To people watching from the shore, they must have appeared strange and imposing. They had sails, raised decks, cannon, and the ability to move against the wind more effectively than canoes. Mexica canoe fleets were numerous and agile, but the brigantines could break formations, destroy barriers, and support attacks along the causeways. Even so, the lake was not easy to control. The Mexican knew every channel, shoal, and hidden stake. They placed sharpened posts beneath the surface to damage ships. Canoe warriors attacked from narrow waters. At night, they repaired defenses and reopened channels. The brigantines gave the coalition an advantage, but not effortless victory. Cortés divided his land forces among the main causeways. Pedro de Alvarado advanced from Tlacopan in the west. Cristobal de Olid approached from Coyoacán. Gonzalo de Sandoval moved from the north. Cortés later commanded attacks from the south. The plan was gradual strangulation. Causeway by causeway, bridge by bridge, district by district, the attackers would push toward the center. The brigantines would cut canoe traffic and prevent food from reaching the city. Allied armies would seize surrounding towns. The aqueduct from Chapultepec would be destroyed. Water, which had sustained Tenochtitlan, became a weapon against it. The defenders fought from rooftops, barricades, canoes, and broken bridges. They opened gaps in causeways and covered them with water or fragile materials. Attackers who rushed forward could fall into hidden channels and be pulled into canoes. Every advance was dangerous. Spanish soldiers wore metal helmets and carried shields, swords, crossbows, firearms, and lances. Indigenous allies used their own shields, bows, slings, spears, clubs, and obsidian-edged weapons. The coalition learned to fill canal gaps with stone and rubble so horses and artillery could pass. But the Mexica often reopened the breaches during the night. A road captured in daylight might be dangerous again by morning. The siege became a contest of endurance. Cortés wanted steady progress, but many assaults turned into chaotic pursuits. Soldiers pushed too far ahead, hoping to capture ground or treasure. When formations broke, Mexica counterattacks struck. In one major reversal, Cortés's forces crossed a gap without securing it properly. The defenders attacked and drove them back. Spaniards and allies fell into the water. Dozens of Spanish soldiers were captured alive. From the coalition camps, drums sounded from the Great Temple. The captives were taken up the pyramid steps and sacrificed in view of their companions. Spanish accounts describe the horror of recognizing comrades by their clothing and pale skin. Indigenous allies understood the ritual meaning as well. The event damaged morale and reminded everyone that the defenders could still strike back. Some Allied forces withdrew temporarily after religious specialists warned that the Mexica gods had promised victory within a set number of days. Cortés's coalition appeared to weaken. Cuauhtémoc used every possible means to keep resistance alive. Messengers appealed to neighboring peoples. Captured banners were displayed. Victories were announced. The defenders hoped the coalition would break apart before Tenochtitlan did. For a time, that hope was not unreasonable. The siege force depended on unity among groups with old rivalries. Supplies had to reach large armies. Disease affected both sides. Spanish commanders argued. Indigenous allies suffered heavy casualties. A major military defeat could have changed everything. But the coalition recovered. The promised Mexica victory did not arrive. Allied contingents returned. More towns abandoned Tenochtitlan. The ring tightened. Inside the city, daily life collapsed. The aqueduct had been cut. People drank polluted lake water. Food became scarce. Canoes trying to bring supplies risked capture by the brigantines. Maize stores emptied. People ate roots, lizards, insects, bark, and whatever could be found. Houses were dismantled for fuel or defenses. Smallpox had already taken thousands. Now dysentery, hunger, thirst, wounds, and exhaustion spread. The dead could not always be buried. Bodies lay in houses, streets, and canals. The smell of decay mixed with smoke and stagnant water. Families moved deeper into the shrinking territory still controlled by the defenders. The city's physical design, once a source of strength and beauty, became a maze of destruction. Bridges were gone. Canals filled with rubble. Temples became watchtowers. Courtyards became shelters. Market spaces became camps for the displaced. The attackers destroyed buildings as they advanced, so the Mexica could not use them again. Cortés later claimed he wished to preserve the city, but siege warfare and tactical necessity led to systematic demolition. Indigenous allies also had reasons to destroy monuments of imperial domination. Stone from houses and temples was thrown into canals to create roads. Tenochtitlan was being unmade in order to be conquered. Day after day, the defenders retreated north toward Tlatelolco. The great marketplace that had once displayed the abundance of Mesoamerica became the last center of resistance. Thousands crowded into a smaller and smaller area. Warriors fought among ruined homes. Women carried water, tended the wounded, prepared what little food remained, and sometimes fought directly. Children hid in buildings or followed families through the wreckage. The distinction between soldier and civilian disappeared. Cuauhtémoc refused to surrender. Cortés sent messages offering terms, partly because continued fighting cost lives and partly because he wanted a functioning city and living subjects. The defenders did not trust him, and they had reason not to. Surrender might mean execution, enslavement, humiliation, or the destruction of their gods. For the Mexica elite, resistance was also tied to duty. A ruler was expected to defend the city. Warriors were expected to face death. Priests continued ceremonies as long as they could. To surrender before every possibility had vanished could mean failing the ancestors, the gods, and the people. Yet ordinary inhabitants carried the greatest cost. They had not chosen imperial strategy. Many had already lost parents, children, homes, and food. Some tried to escape by canoe. Others hid beneath mats or among bodies. Coalition forces searching for treasure sometimes robbed or killed the weak. The siege was not a clean contest between two leaders. It was a human catastrophe. By August, the last defenders were trapped in Tlatelolco. The coalition controlled most of the lake and causeways. Hunger had become unbearable. Disease moved unchecked. The Mexica still launched attacks, but their ability to organize large resistance was fading. On August 13, 1521, Cuauhtémoc attempted to leave by canoe with family members and nobles. A Spanish brigantine intercepted them. The young ruler was brought before Cortés. According to a famous account, Cuauhtémoc touched the conqueror's dagger and asked to be killed, having done all he could to defend his city. The exact wording may be literary, but the moment captured the end of organized resistance. Cortés did not kill him immediately. The siege was over. Survivors began leaving the ruins. They crossed causeways under guard, weak from hunger and illness. Spanish and Allied soldiers searched them for gold. Families carried children and the few belongings they had saved. Nobles and commoners passed through the same landscape of destruction. No reliable count exists for the dead. Tens of thousands likely died during the siege and associated epidemics, perhaps far more. The destruction affected not only Tenochtitlan but communities throughout the basin. Allied armies also suffered heavily. The fall did not happen because the Mexica were cowardly, primitive, or paralyzed by superstition. They resisted for months under siege, after epidemic disease, political fragmentation, and the loss of access to food and water. They fought against Spanish forces supported by vast indigenous coalitions. They adapted to horses, cannon, ships, and steel. They won major victories and nearly destroyed Cortés's expedition more than once. The empire fell because several forces converged. Spanish ambition brought an invading command willing to gamble everything for wealth, status, conversion, and royal favor. Indigenous rivalries provided allies, intelligence, labor, supplies, and armies. The tribute system created enemies who saw opportunity in Mexican weakness. Smallpox shattered communities at a critical moment. Control of the lake isolated the capital. And the final siege turned urban life itself into a trap. Remove any one of these forces, and the outcome might have been different. Had Tlaxcala destroyed Cortés after the first battles, The expedition might have ended in 1519. Had the Tenochtitlan massacre not occurred, the foreigners might have remained contained longer or been expelled under different conditions. Had smallpox not killed Cuitlahuac and thousands of others, the defense might have been stronger. Had subject cities remained loyal, Cortés could never have surrounded Tenochtitlan with such numbers. History often appears inevitable only after it is finished. In the spring of 1519, the fall of Tenochtitlan was not inevitable. In the summer of 1520, after the Night of Sorrows, Spanish defeat seemed possible. Even during the siege, the coalition nearly fractured. The empire collapsed through a chain of choices, accidents, resentments, diseases, and battles whose outcome no one fully controlled. For Cortés, August 13th was a triumph. For Tlaxcala and other allies, it was the defeat of a hated power. For the surviving Mexica, it was the end of a city, a dynasty, and a sacred order. But it was not the end of their people. After the fighting stopped, the ruins of Tenochtitlan remained surrounded by water. The causeways still reached across the lake. The mountains still stood around the basin. The sun still rose over Popocatépetl and Itzcoatl. Birds returned to reeds along the shore. But the human world had changed. Cortés chose to rebuild the Spanish capital directly over the conquered city. This decision was practical and symbolic. Tenochtitlan already occupied the political center of the region. Roads and causeways connected it to surrounding towns. The site carried immense prestige. By building there, the Spaniards claimed the authority of the defeated empire while announcing a new order. The new city was called Mexico. Its churches, government buildings, houses, and plazas rose among the broken temples and canals of Tenochtitlan. Stones from indigenous structures were reused in colonial construction. The sacred center became the center of Spanish power. Yet cities are never rebuilt from stone alone. Indigenous laborers cleared debris, filled canals, repaired roads, carried water, shaped timber, quarried stone, and constructed the colonial capital. Nahua communities continued to live around and within the city. Their knowledge made survival possible. The conquest did not replace one population with another overnight. Spanish settlers were few. They depended on indigenous farmers, artisans, interpreters, scribes, messengers, allies, servants, and local rulers. The early colonial state was built through unequal negotiation with communities that had survived the war. Cortés rewarded soldiers and allies with claims to tribute and labor. The encomienda system granted Spaniards the right to receive payments and service from designated indigenous communities, supposedly in exchange for protection and Christian instruction. In practice, it often produced exploitation, forced labor, and abuse. The Spanish crown attempted to regulate conquest while benefiting from it. Officials, judges, priests, and rival conquerors competed for authority. Cortés wrote letters defending his actions and presenting himself as a loyal servant who had won a great empire for the king. His descriptions emphasized wealth, cities, conversion, and victory. The surviving indigenous allies also made claims. Tlaxcalan leaders reminded the crown that they had fought beside the Spaniards. They sought privileges, reduced tribute, protection of land, recognition of noble rank, and permission to display coats of arms. Indigenous nobles learned to use Spanish legal language while preserving their own histories of the conquest. The story was never told in only one voice. Spanish soldiers wrote memoirs. Franciscan friars collected testimony. Nahua scribes painted histories. Town councils recorded land disputes. Noble families preserved genealogies. Songs and oral traditions remembered grief, courage, betrayal, and survival. One of the most important colonial works became known as the Florentine Codex, compiled in the 16th century under the direction of the Franciscan Bernardino de Sahagun with the essential work of Nahua scholars, artists, and informants. Its 12 books recorded language, religion, plants, animals, society, history, and the conquest. The text contains both Nahuatl and Spanish, but the two versions do not always say exactly the same thing. The indigenous account of conquest preserves scenes of fear, confusion, violence, and mourning that differ sharply from triumphal Spanish narratives. Other manuscripts, including the Codex Mendoza, recorded tribute, rulers, conquests, education, and daily life. Some were created for Spanish officials, but relied on indigenous artists and systems of knowledge. These colonial documents are not windows without distortion. They were produced after catastrophe, often under missionary supervision, political pressure, or legal need. Yet without them, much of what is known about the Mexico world would be lost. The destruction of temples and books was extensive. Christian missionaries viewed indigenous religion as idolatry. Sacred images were broken. Ritual objects were burned. Priests were forced into hiding or conversion. Ceremonies were prohibited. Children of nobles were educated in Christian schools. Some missionaries studied Nahuatl deeply because conversion required communication. This created a paradox. The campaign to destroy the old religion also produced records of it. Nahua scholars explained gods, calendars, rituals, medicine, history, and poetry to friars who hoped to replace those traditions. Their knowledge survived inside texts created by the colonial church. Conversion itself was gradual and complicated. People accepted baptism for many reasons: faith, pressure, survival, alliance, family strategy, or access to colonial institutions. Christian saints could become associated with older sacred places. Festivals changed but continued. Indigenous languages carried Christian teachings while preserving pre-conquest ideas. The result was not a simple disappearance of one religion and arrival of another. It was centuries of conflict, adaptation, secrecy, creativity, and blending. Cuauhtémoc remained alive after the siege because Cortés needed him. The captured ruler could help command obedience, reveal treasure, and legitimize the transition. But the Spaniards believed enormous amounts of gold were hidden. They tortured Cuauhtémoc and another noble by burning their feet, attempting to force them to reveal the location of treasure. The episode exposed the greed beneath claims of spiritual conquest. Cuauhtémoc survived the torture. Several years later, Cortés took him on an expedition toward Honduras, fearing that leaving him behind might encourage rebellion. In 1525, Cortés ordered Cuauhtémoc executed after accusing him of conspiracy. The last ruler of independent Tenochtitlan died, far from his city. Over time, Cuauhtémoc became a symbol of resistance and dignity. His historical image has been shaped by later Mexican nationalism, public monuments, political movements, and debates about identity. The man himself remains partly hidden behind legend. Other members of the indigenous elite adapted to colonial rule. Some retained local offices. Some converted and took Spanish names. Some married into influential families. Some used courts to defend property. Others lost land and status. The nobility did not vanish immediately, but its power was transformed. For common people, colonial life brought new burdens. Tribute continued under different masters. Labor demands increased. Mines, farms, construction projects, and transport systems consumed human effort. European livestock damaged fields. New laws altered landholding. Violence and displacement followed expansion. The most devastating force remained disease. Smallpox was only the beginning. Further epidemics swept through the 16th century, including measles and terrible outbreaks known in Nahuatl as Cocolitli. The exact diseases involved in some epidemics remain debated. What is certain is that indigenous populations declined catastrophically. Communities lost elders, children, farmers, rulers, healers, and keepers of memory. Fields went unplanted. Towns were combined. Social networks broke apart. The demographic collapse changed the landscape as profoundly as war. It is difficult to imagine the scale of grief. A village might survive conquest only to lose half its people to disease. A child might witness repeated epidemics before adulthood. A family genealogy could end within one generation. Sacred knowledge passed orally might disappear when its last keeper died. And still, people continued. They replanted fields. They rebuilt homes. They petitioned courts. They composed songs. They taught children Nahuatl. They preserved community boundaries. They adapted European tools and animals to local life. They carried old patterns into new art. The survival of Nahua culture was not accidental. It required continuous choices by millions of people whose names are unknown. Mothers taught words and stories. Farmers remembered when to plant. Healers preserved knowledge of plants. Scribes copied documents. Town leaders defended communal lands. Artists painted Christian scenes using indigenous visual traditions. Musicians blended instruments and styles. The empire ended, but the language of the Mexica did not. Nahuatl remained widely spoken across central Mexico. It became a major written language of colonial administration, religion, legal petitions, drama, poetry, and local history. Thousands of documents survive in alphabetic Nahuatl. Many words entered Spanish and later English. Chocolate comes through Nahuatl. So do tomato, avocado, chili, coyote, ocelot, and other terms shaped by the movement of plants, animals, foods, and knowledge across the world. The Columbian exchange transformed diets and economies far beyond Mexico. Maize became a staple in parts of Africa, Europe, and Asia. Tomatoes changed Mediterranean cooking. Chilies traveled into cuisines from India to Korea. Cacao became global chocolate, altered by sugar, milk, industry, and empire. These familiar foods carry histories of indigenous cultivation. The people of Mesoamerica had domesticated, selected, and refined plants over thousands of years. The wealth sought by conquerors was not only gold. It was biological and cultural knowledge. Mexico City continued to grow over the lake. Colonial authorities drained water to control flooding and create land. Canals disappeared. Causeways became roads. The ecological system that had sustained Tenochtitlan was gradually transformed. The city still flooded repeatedly. Engineers launched enormous drainage projects. Wetlands shrank. Freshwater sources were redirected. Over centuries, the lake world became a dry metropolis that now struggles with sinking ground, water shortages, and floods. The old geography has not vanished completely. It remains beneath streets, buildings, subway tunnels, and plazas. Archaeologists find canals, walls, offerings, sculptures, burials, and foundations during modern construction. Each discovery reveals another layer of the city that came before. In 1978, electrical workers near the center of Mexico City uncovered a massive stone carving of Coilzauqui, the moon-associated goddess defeated by Huitzilopochtli in Mexica's sacred tradition. The discovery triggered major excavations of the Templo Mayor. The ancient temple had not disappeared. It had been waiting beneath the colonial and modern city. Archaeologists uncovered successive building stages, offerings from across the empire, sculptures, animal remains, shells, coral, obsidian, ceramics, masks, and objects buried in carefully arranged deposits. The offerings mapped imperial reach and sacred meaning. Materials from mountains, deserts, forests, and seas were brought to the center of Tenochtitlan. Crocodiles, eagles, wolves, jaguars, fish, and marine shells appeared in ritual contexts. Some animals had been kept, fed, or transported alive. The temple was not simply a platform for public ceremony. It was a constructed model of the universe. Each buried object connected the city to distant landscapes, myths, directions, gods, and political victories. The layers of the temple preserved the ambitions of successive rulers. Modern excavation also changed public memory. For centuries, colonial monuments had dominated the center of Mexico City. The rediscovered Templo Mayor made the indigenous capital physically visible again. Visitors could stand beside cathedral walls and look down into the foundations of Tenochtitlan. The two cities occupied the same ground. Neither could be understood without the other. To look only at Conquest is to see the Aztec world through the moment of its destruction. The final war matters, but it lasted only a small part of the empire's history. 4 generations before Cortés arrived, millions of people lived full lives within and around the political world of the Triple Alliance. They were born, worked, married, argued, prayed, traded, joked, mourned, and grew old. Their lives cannot be reduced to temples, warriors, and sacrifice. Imagine returning to Tenochtitlan before the invasion, perhaps during the early years of Moctezuma II. The first sound before sunrise may be a drum from the sacred precinct. In a household courtyard, someone stirs the embers. A woman kneels beside a metate and begins grinding soaked maize into dough. The stone makes a steady rhythm. Water is heated. Tortillas cook on a clay griddle. The family eats simply. Maize forms the center of the meal. Beans add nourishment. Chilies bring heat and flavor. Squash, tomatoes, amaranth, herbs, insects, fish, turkey, dog, rabbit, waterfowl, and other foods appear according to place, season, and wealth. Meat is not equally available to everyone. Many daily meals are based on grains, vegetables, sauces, and lake resources. Food carries social and ritual meaning. Tamales are prepared for ordinary meals and festivals. Cacao drinks are valuable and often associated with elites, merchants, ceremonies, or special occasions. Different ingredients, flours, spices, and preparation methods create many varieties. A noble household eats differently from a poor farming family, but even luxury depends on ordinary labor. Farmers plant maize in fields beyond the city. Canoe workers transport it. Potters make storage jars. Women grind and cook it. Market sellers distribute it. Tribute officials count it. Priests offer it. The empire rests on food long before it rests on gold. As daylight grows, children begin their tasks. Younger children help carry water, sweep courtyards, watch siblings, gather fuel, and learn by observing adults. Older children may go to school, work in fields, train in crafts, or assist in household production. Cleanliness is valued. People bathe frequently compared with many Europeans of the same period. Steam baths, known as temazcales, are used for health, childbirth recovery, ritual purification, and relaxation. The structure is low and enclosed. Water poured over heated stones fills the chamber with steam. Medical knowledge combines practical observation, plant remedies, physical treatment, divination, and religious ideas. Healers recognize wounds, fevers, digestive illness, childbirth complications, broken bones, and the effects of poisonous plants or animals. They use herbs, resins, minerals, massage, splints, steam, and other treatments. Some remedies are effective. Others depend on beliefs that modern medicine does not share. Midwives hold respected knowledge. They guide pregnancy, birth, bathing, recovery, and infant care. Birth is dangerous, and women who die in childbirth receive a special sacred status compared with warriors who die in battle. Life expectancy is shaped by childhood disease, injury, war, nutrition, and social conditions. Some people live into old age. Elders are respected as keepers of memory and advice, though age does not protect everyone from poverty or hardship. In the streets, clothing reveals status. Common men often wear a loincloth and mantle. Women wear skirts and blouses. Sandals, jewelry, feather ornaments, and finely woven cotton distinguish rank and achievement. Sumptuary rules limit who may wear certain materials, colors, and designs. Textiles are among the most important forms of wealth. A finely woven garment requires skill, time, cotton, dyes, and labor. Cloth can be gifted, traded, stored, worn, or demanded as tribute. Rulers reward warriors and officials with garments that announce their status publicly. Featherwork reaches extraordinary refinement. Artists select feathers for color, shine, softness, and symbolic meaning. Tiny pieces are arranged into shields, fans, headdresses, costumes, and mosaics. Quetzal feathers, long and green, are especially prestigious. The birds may be captured and released after feathers are taken rather than always killed. Feather workers, goldsmiths, stone carvers, painters, potters, lapidaries, woodworkers, and other specialists often labor in organized communities or palace workshops. Obsidian remains essential. This volcanic glass can be fractured into edges sharper than many metal blades. It is used for tools, weapons, ritual knives, and household objects. Major sources such as Pachuca produce green obsidian valued across Mesoamerica. Copper is known and worked into bells, axes, needles, ornaments, and tools, especially in western and southern regions. Gold is prized for beauty and sacred associations, but it is not used as a standardized currency in the same way Europeans later imagined wealth. Turquoise, jade-like greenstones, shell, crystal, and other materials carry meanings beyond rarity. Green can evoke water, vegetation, fertility, preciousness, and life. Blue may connect to rain, sky, fire, sacrifice, or particular gods depending on context. Color is not decoration alone. It is part of a symbolic language. Sculptures are painted. The pale stone surfaces seen in museums today can create a false image of a colorless past. Temples, statues, manuscripts, shields, pottery, and clothing once displayed strong reds, blues, yellows, greens, blacks, and whites. The city itself would have appeared vivid. White plaster reflected sunlight. Painted temple walls rose above. Blue canals, flower gardens softened palace courtyards. Feathered costumes moved during festivals. Smoke from incense drifted across the sacred precinct. Music filled public life. Large drums, wooden slit drums, flutes, rattles, whistles, shell trumpets, and singing accompanied ceremony, dance, education, war, and celebration. Songs preserved history and praised rulers. They also explored grief, friendship, beauty, death, and the uncertainty of life. Nawa poetry often returns to flowers and song. These images can represent art, truth, beauty, fame, or the fragile things that make life meaningful. A poet asks whether anything lasts on earth. Flowers bloom and fade. Jade can break. Gold can be crushed. Even rulers die. Such poetry complicates the image of an empire obsessed only with war. Its thinkers were deeply aware of impermanence. Nezahualcóyotl of Texcoco became famous in later tradition as a poet king. Some poems attributed to him may have been changed or assigned to his name over time, but the intellectual culture of Texcoco was real. Scholars, singers, priests, scribes, and nobles debated history, morality, ritual, and the nature of truth. Public speaking was highly valued. Formal speeches marked births, marriages, appointments, departures, deaths, and political meetings. Elders advised young people to be humble, disciplined, moderate, and respectful. Rulers were warned that power was temporary and dangerous. This moral tradition did not prevent cruelty or ambition. No society's ideals perfectly describe its behavior, but it shows that Mexican life included self-criticism and ethical reflection. Justice was organized through courts at different levels. Judges heard disputes over land, theft, marriage, debt, inheritance, assault, and public conduct. Noble judges were expected to resist bribery. Punishments could be severe, including death for certain crimes. Ranks sometimes affected legal treatment, but nobles could also face harsher judgment because they were expected to set an example. Markets had their own oversight. Palace courts handled high matters. Texcoco gained a reputation for legal sophistication under Nezahualcóyotl and his successors. Laws cannot be understood apart from social control. The state regulated clothing, drinking, sexuality, warfare, tribute, and public behavior. Pulque, an alcoholic drink made from agave, had ritual and everyday uses, but public drunkenness could bring punishment, especially for younger people. Elders were often granted more freedom to drink. Agave was one of the most useful plants in central Mexico. Its fibers made rope, cloth, sandals, bags, and paper-like materials. Its sap produced drink. Its thorns served as needles and ritual bloodletting tools. Its leaves could be used in construction and cooking. Paper was also made from bark and other fibers. It served scribes, merchants, rulers, and temples. Vast quantities could be demanded as tribute and burned in offerings. Flowers were cultivated with remarkable care. They decorated homes, palaces, temples, feasts, and bodies. Botanical gardens collected plants from distant regions. Rulers displayed rare species as signs of knowledge and power. Gardens were not merely places of pleasure. They demonstrated command over water, labor, climate, and imperial networks. A tropical plant growing in a highland palace garden represented the reach of tribute and human skill. Animals also carried layered meanings. Eagles were associated with the sun, warriors, and the sky. Jaguars represented night, earth, caves, strength, and elite warfare. Serpents could connect water, fertility, fire, wind, and divine power. Butterflies were linked to flame, transformation, and fallen warriors. Hummingbirds evoked Huitzilopochtli and the vivid energy of life. The Mexica did not view nature as separate from civilization. Human society existed inside a sacred landscape of animals, plants, weather, directions, mountains, waters, and celestial cycles. This is why the destruction of temples after conquest was more than the loss of buildings. A temple held relationships. It connected a neighborhood to its patron deity, a ruler to legitimacy, a mountain to rain, a calendar date to ritual duty, and a people to remembered origins. When the Spaniards broke images and raised crosses, they were not simply replacing art. They were attacking a system through which the world had been understood. But systems of meaning rarely disappear at command. People carried them into new forms. A sacred hill might receive a Christian chapel. A festival date might shift around a saint's day. Flowers, candles, processions, music, and offerings continued with changing explanations. Nahuatl words shaped Christian prayers. Survival often wore the clothing of adaptation. The same was true of political identity. After 1521, people did not suddenly stop calling themselves Mexica, Tlatelolca, Tlaxcalteca, Texcocan, Calca, or members of other communities. Local identities remain powerful. Colonial records are filled with towns defending boundaries and histories that reached back before conquest. The idea of a single Aztec people united under one identity can therefore be misleading. The empire contained many peoples, languages, and memories. Even Nahuatl-speaking communities could be bitter rivals. The Triple Alliance was a political order imposed across diversity, not a modern nation-state. This diversity was one reason Cortés found allies. It was also one reason indigenous civilization survived. There was no single center whose destruction could erase every tradition. Knowledge lived in thousands of households and communities. When Tenochtitlan fell, other towns still had farmers, nobles, healers, musicians, and scribes. The conquerors captured a capital. They did not capture every memory. Centuries after the conquest, the Aztec Empire continues to exist in a strange space between history and legend. Its images are everywhere. The eagle on the cactus appears at the center of the Mexican flag. The face of Cuauhtémoc stands in monuments and public squares. The ruins of the Templo Mayor lie beside the cathedral in Mexico City. Names from Nahuatl remain on maps, streets, towns, volcanoes, foods, and everyday speech. Yet familiarity can create illusion. People may recognize the symbols while knowing only a simplified story. In one version, the Aztecs appear only as bloodthirsty warriors waiting to be destroyed by civilization. This image grew from conquest propaganda, religious hostility, and centuries of colonial prejudice. In another version, they appear as a perfect and peaceful people whose violence was invented entirely by Europeans. This image also fails because it denies evidence and removes the complexity of human history. The real world was neither simple monster nor perfect victim. The Mexica built an extraordinary city, developed productive agriculture, organized vast markets, preserved poetry, supported skilled arts, and governed a powerful political system. They also conquered cities, demanded tribute, used terror, and practiced human sacrifice. The Spaniards brought technologies, animals, and connections that transformed the Americas. They also invaded for wealth and power, carried out massacres, tortured captives, imposed forced labor, and destroyed sacred traditions. Indigenous allies helped defeat Tenochtitlan because they had real grievances and ambitions. They were not merely deceived assistants. Yet the colonial order that followed did not give them full freedom or equality. History becomes clearer when no one is reduced to a symbol. Cortés was courageous, calculating, persuasive, ruthless, and extraordinarily fortunate. Moctezuma was powerful, experienced, cautious, and trapped by choices whose consequences he could not predict. Malintzin was enslaved, indispensable, intelligent, and forced to navigate dangers created by men with armies. Cuauhtémoc was a ruler defending a collapsing city, later transformed into a national hero. Each lived inside a world larger than any one person. The fall of Tenochtitlan was not a duel between Cortés and Moctezuma. It was the collision of empires, city-states, diseases, religions, technologies, ambitions, and local rivalries. It involved Spanish soldiers, African participants, Caribbean indigenous people, Totonacs, Tlaxcalans, Texcocans, Calcas, Mexica, Tlatelolca, and many others whose names rarely appear in popular stories. Even the word conquest can mislead when it suggests a single finished event. Tenochtitlan fell in 1521, but Spanish control over all of what became Mexico took generations. Some regions resisted for decades. Maya states remained independent in parts of the South for far longer. Northern peoples fought colonial expansion for centuries. The conquest was not one moment. It was a long process. So was survival. Today, Millions of people in Mexico and beyond descend from the indigenous peoples of Mesoamerica. Nahuatl is still spoken in many communities, though it contains regional varieties and has faced centuries of pressure. Indigenous identities remain living realities, not archaeological remains. This changes how the Aztec story should end. It should not end with empty ruins and silence. It should end with continuity. After the temples fell, children still learned words their ancestors had spoken. Farmers still planted maize. Women still prepared food on stone grinding surfaces. Communities still gathered for festivals. Healers still knew plants. Songs changed, but did not disappear. The past survived in habits so ordinary that conquerors could not always see them. It survived in the shape of a tortilla, in the name of a place, in a flower offered at a grave, in a story told beside a fire, in the memory of water beneath a city. Modern Mexico City is one of the largest urban areas in the world, and beneath it lies the old island capital. The ground sinks because centuries of drainage removed water from the soft lakebed. Buildings tilt. Streets flood during heavy rain. Engineers pump water into a metropolis built where lakes once spread toward the mountains. The problems of the modern city echo the choices of the past. The Mexica adapted the city to water. Colonial and modern planners tried to remove the water from the city. Neither system was perfect, but the contrast is striking. Tenochtitlan used canals, dikes, aqueducts, and raised fields to live inside a lake environment. Later urban expansion buried canals and drained wetlands, creating new vulnerabilities. In Xochimilco, remnants of the old lake and chinampa landscape still survive, though under pressure from pollution and development. Canoes move through canals bordered by fields and trees. The landscape is modern, altered, and fragile, but it preserves a distant echo of the world that fed Tenochtitlan. Archaeology continues to reveal that world. Excavators work in narrow spaces between modern buildings. A utility project may uncover a wall. A renovation may expose a platform. Beneath streets lie offerings placed more than 5 centuries ago. Each discovery requires patience. Objects are mapped, photographed, cleaned, analyzed, and compared. Soil preserves seeds and pollen. Bones reveal diet, movement, illness, and ritual treatment. Chemical traces identify pigments. Stone sources reveal trade routes. Teeth record childhood stress. Shells point toward distant coasts. The city speaks through fragments. A broken pot shows what someone cooked. A child's burial shows grief. A stone box filled with marine objects shows how rulers imagined the universe. A cut mark on bone reveals violence. A layer of flood sediment records environmental crisis. No single source tells the entire story. Spanish accounts contain eyewitness detail but also exaggeration, justification, and misunderstanding. Indigenous accounts preserve local memory but were often recorded after conquest. Archaeology reveals material life but cannot always explain belief. Art shows symbols whose meanings may shift by context. Historical truth emerges through comparison. When different forms of evidence agree, confidence grows. When they conflict, uncertainty must remain. This is especially important with famous stories. Did the Mexica truly found Tenochtitlan in exactly 1325? The date is traditional and widely accepted, but the growth of settlement may have been gradual. Did Moctezuma believe Cortés was a god? Probably not in the simple way the legend claims. Did Cortés burn his ships? He more likely disabled or dismantled them. Did hundreds of thousands of people live in Tenochtitlan? Estimates vary, though the city was unquestionably enormous. Were 80,000 people sacrificed at a single temple dedication, as some accounts claim? Such exact numbers are highly doubtful. Did a handful of Spaniards conquer the empire alone? No. Indigenous allies were essential. Correcting these myths does not make the story less dramatic. It makes it more human. The most powerful truth is not that a tiny group of invincible foreigners defeated an entire civilization through superior weapons. The truth is that the empire contained enemies within its own political world, and Cortés learned how to join them together. The truth is that disease transformed the battlefield. The truth is that Tenochtitlan resisted with extraordinary determination. The truth is that victory produced consequences no participant fully anticipated. Tlaxcalan leaders wanted the end of Mexica domination. They achieved it. But Spanish colonial rule brought new demands. Cortés wanted wealth, honor, and authority. He achieved fame, but spent later years defending his position against rivals and royal officials. The crown wanted a Christian empire rich in tribute. It gained vast territory, but governing it required constant negotiation and violence. Missionaries wanted to erase indigenous religion. They converted millions, yet indigenous ideas entered colonial Christianity. The Mexica defenders wanted to preserve their city. They failed, but their descendants preserved language, memory, and identity. No victory was complete. No defeat was absolute. This is one reason the Aztec story continues to hold attention. It is a story of impossible growth. A rejected migrant people built a capital in a marsh and rose to command much of central Mexico. It is a story of engineering. A city of canals, causeways, aqueducts, gardens, markets, and temples flourished on an island where stronger neighbors had once believed little could grow. It is a story of ambition. Rulers expanded tribute networks across mountains and tropical lowlands, believing military success proved sacred favor. It is a story of fragility. The empire looked immense, but loyalty was uneven. Once the center weakened, old enemies turned against it. It is a story of miscalculation. Moctezuma tried to contain strangers through diplomacy. Cortés gambled on alliances he could not fully control. Indigenous rulers believed they could use the Spaniards against rivals. Every side underestimated what would follow. It is a story of endurance. The defenders continued through hunger, disease, thirst, bombardment, and the destruction of their homes. And it is a story of survival beyond empire. The political system disappeared, but the people did not. Perhaps the clearest symbol of this history is not a weapon, a crown, or even a pyramid. It is the city itself. Tenochtitlan began as an island settlement on uncertain ground. It grew by driving roots into mud, carrying soil into water, and joining small pieces of land together. Its people did not wait for a perfect place. They created one. Then conquest shattered it. Stone temples were torn down. Canals were filled. Palaces vanished. The lake receded. Yet a city remained on the same ground. Layers accumulated. Mexica beneath colonial Spanish. Colonial Spanish beneath modern Mexican. Ancient roads beneath traffic. Temple foundations beneath churches. Canoe routes beneath avenues. The past was buried, but never absent. On a quiet morning in the center of Mexico City, the streets fill before sunrise. Workers open shops. Food vendors prepare maize dough. Buses move along roads that cross the former lake. Bells ring from the cathedral. Nearby, visitors walk beside the exposed stones of the Templo. Mayor. The old city and the new city occupy the same moment. A person can stand where priests once watched the sun rise between distant mountains. They can look toward the place where Moctezuma's palace stood. They can walk near the route Cortés took into the capital. Beneath their feet are fragments of walls, offerings, canals, and homes. The air no longer carries thousands of canoes across Lake Texcoco. The great temple no longer towers over the island. The marketplace of Tlatelolco no longer gathers merchants from every province of the empire. But the story remains. It remains because the Aztec Empire was never only the story of its rulers. It belonged to the farmer lifting mud from a canal onto a chinampa, to the woman weaving tribute cloth in a courtyard, to the merchant crossing a mountain pass with cacao and feathers, to the child learning songs in a neighborhood school, to the engineer measuring water, to the artist setting green feathers into a shield, to the healer carrying herbs, to the canoe worker crossing the lake before dawn, to the soldier standing on a broken causeway, to the survivor leaving the ruined city in August 1521. Most of their names are gone. Their work is not. They built the roads, raised the temples, fed the markets, filled the armies, and preserved the language. Empires are remembered through kings, but they are created by countless ordinary hands. The fall of Tenochtitlan is often treated as the ending of an ancient world and the beginning of a modern one. In reality, worlds do not end so cleanly. The old enters the new. The conquered shape the conqueror. Memory survives inside language, food, land, family, ritual, and resistance. The year 1521 marked a devastating break, but not a complete division. Mexico was not born from Spain alone. It was not born from Tenochtitlan alone. It emerged through conflict, mixture, survival, and unequal power. Its history includes the people who fought for the empire, the people who fought against it, the people brought across the Atlantic, and the generations born after conquest who created lives none of their ancestors could have predicted. The Aztec Empire lasted less than a century in its imperial form. From the victory over Azcapotzalco in 1428 to the fall of Tenochtitlan in 1521, only 93 years passed. That is a remarkably short time. Within those decades, Tenochtitlan rose from a regional capital to the center of a tribute network stretching across much of Mesoamerica. Its population expanded. Its temples grew. Its armies marched farther. Its rulers believed they stood at the center of the world. Then, in only 2 years, the political structure collapsed. The speed of the fall can make the empire seem weak. It was not. Its enemies needed epidemic disease, indigenous mass armies, naval control of the lake, months of siege, and the destruction of the city block by block. The speed of the fall reveals something else. Power can grow faster than loyalty. The empire had conquered many communities without fully binding them to its future. Tribute moved toward Tenochtitlan, but affection did not always move with it. When the moment came, the same roads that carried imperial wealth carried armies against the capital. History remembers the splendor of the city and the drama of its destruction. But the deepest lesson may lie between them. No empire stands only on walls, weapons, or fear. It stands on relationships. When those relationships break, even a city in the middle of a lake can be surrounded. When food stops arriving, temples cannot feed the people. When allies become enemies, roads become invasion routes. When disease enters a crowded city, military courage cannot stop it. And when a ruler no longer controls the meaning of events, ceremony cannot restore authority. The final defenders of Tenochtitlan watched their world shrink day by day. First they lost the outer towns, then the lake, then the causeways, then the freshwater aqueduct, then the southern districts, then the sacred center. At last, they held only the crowded ruins of Tlatelolco. Yet they continued. That resistance did not save the empire, but it shaped how the fall would be remembered. Cuauhtémoc did not become a symbol because he won. He became a symbol because he remained when victory was no longer possible. The city did not become legendary because it was eternal. It became legendary because it was beautiful, powerful, vulnerable, and lost. Far beneath the modern streets, the stones of Tenochtitlan rest in darkness. They do not tell a simple story of glory. They do not tell a simple story of savagery. They tell of people who built greatness from difficult ground. They tell of an empire that mistook domination for permanence. They tell of invaders who could not have won alone. They tell of enemies who became allies, allies who became subjects, and survivors who carried the past into a new age. Above those stones, the city continues to breathe. And perhaps that is the final truth of the Aztec Empire. It fell, but it never completely disappeared.